I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us from our studios in Israel. Coming up in today's newscast, the Palestinians have been accepted into Interpol in a dramatic vote. Israel begins to mourn the victims of yesterday's tragic terror attack near Jerusalem. And we'll reveal how a unique social experiment in Israel is bringing people together. Stay tuned for the latest news in Israel. Now, here's some breaking news. The Palestinians have been accepted into the world's largest police organization, Interpol, even though Israel has been actively trying to thwart the request. Earlier today, over 75% of Interpol member states voted to accept the Palestinians into the organization as the 191st member. Out of the 133 member states who participated in the vote in China, 75 voted yes, 24 no, and another 34 abstained. The move is being hailed by Palestinian officials who are calling it a victory for the Palestinian people.
ليس فقط أن تكون دولة، بل دولة تستطيع أن تتحمل التزامات هذه المنظمة، أي لديها أجهزة شرطية وأجهزة أمنية قادرة على الوفاء بالتزامات دولة فلسطين، بنفس الوقت لديها قضاء ونظام قانوني يستطيع مساءلة المجرمين الذين ينتهكون القانون الفلسطيني وحقوق الشعب الفلسطيني.
The news comes as a major blow to Israeli security officials who are worried that Hamas will now have access to sensitive security information shared by the international police community. Israel's long-standing policy has been to oppose the Palestinians in their attempts to join international organizations. The Jewish state argues that the Palestinians should only be allowed to join these organizations once they are recognized as an official state and have concluded direct peace talks with Israel. While Israeli diplomats have worked to block the Palestinians from joining Interpol in 2015 and 2016, it seems like Israel just couldn't muster up enough support to block the Palestinians this time around. An IDF lieutenant and a sergeant have been killed in a tragic training accident last night, and 4 other soldiers have been injured as well. ILTV's Aaron Porras has the story.
The incident took place when the self-propelled howitzer tank they were traveling in flipped over. Of the wounded survivors, one is said to be severely injured, another moderately hurt, and the other 2 lightly hurt. Thankfully, though, none of their injuries are life-threatening. Following the tragedy, the IDF has called off all exercises until next week, starting today. And furthermore, no mobile artillery will be allowed to be driven after dark until further notice.
Now, for some breaking news involving the highly controversial Elor Azaria case, IDF Chief of Staff Gadi Eisenkot has just announced that he's reducing Elor Azaria's prison sentence from 18 months to 14 months. Eisenkot's decision comes after Elor Azaria wrote a letter to the IDF chief asking for clemency and a shorter sentence. Azaria was convicted earlier this year for killing an incapacitated Palestinian assailant while he was an IDF soldier stationed in the West Bank city of Hebron. Video footage of the incident went viral, throwing the case into the global spotlight. The incident has divided Israelis on how soldiers should respond to Palestinian attackers who are incapacitated. The announcement today surely puts the saga to an end, which both the Israeli government and the army surely will be happy about. The international community is slamming the horrific terror attack that left 3 Israelis dead near Jerusalem yesterday, but the Hamas leaders of the Gaza Strip are continuing to praise the violence. The Islamic terrorist organization Hamas claims the attack was a so-called just and a normal reaction to Israeli occupation.
حماس تبارك عملية القدس اليوم تعتبرها رد طبيعي أولا على جرائم الاحتلال وعلى استمرار أيضا الاحتلال للأرض والمقدسات الفلسطينية. تؤكد أن القدس هي جوهر الصراع بيننا وبين الاحتلال وأن شعبنا لا يمكن إلا أن يستمر في مقاومته حتى يحصل على حريته.
Well, now the European Union is not only condemning the terrorist attack, but also calling out Hamas for promoting incitement, saying, quote, attempts by Hamas to glorify the attack are reprehensible. Violence and terror will only achieve more loss and pain and must stop. For the first time in many years, the United States Embassy and the consulate in Jerusalem have issued a joint statement condemning the attack. In the past, the two offices have worked separately and do not always see eye to eye, with the embassy remaining in charge of interactions with the Israeli government and the consulate dealing with the Palestinian Authority. The joint statement may reveal a differing policy under the Trump administration, and that isn't the only show of unity. The ambassadors of Canada, France, and the UN are also condemning the attack. Meanwhile, Israel is beginning to mourn the victims of the tragic terror attack in Khal Adal. The victims' names have now been released to the public. 20-year-old border police officer Solomon Gabria, 24-year-old Yusuf Ottoman from the nearby Arab town of Abu Ghosh, and 25-year-old Or Arish from Khal Adal himself. Sergeant Gaviria was enlisted in the border police 19 months ago and was actually stabbed 6 months later during another terrorist attack. Despite his injury, he decided to return to duty just 2 months later, meeting his tragic end in yesterday's attack. He comes from a family of Ethiopian immigrants. Mourners prepared a burial for security guard and Arab-Israeli Yusuf Ottoman yesterday in his small town of Abu Ghosh, a village known for its heavy Jewish tourism.
ילד לתפארת, ילד טוב, כולם אוהבים אותו, עוזר לכולם, בהר אדר איפה שהוא עבד, התושבים שם פשוט מתים עליו, מחשיבים אותו אחד מהם, גם פה בכפר, החברים, המשפחה, כולם אוהבים אותו.
Dozens of family members and friends also gathered in Khal Adar to console the family of Or Arish, a young man who was guarding the community to save additional money for college. A fourth man who survived the attack has been identified as 33-year-old Amit Steinhardt, the security coordinator for Khal Adar. He was shot in the shoulder and hip and is being treated in a Jerusalem hospital. He's expected to survive. Well, Israeli politicians are now calling to take new measures against Palestinian terrorists following the tragic attack that took place in an Israeli settlement yesterday morning. Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman's hawkish party, Israel Beitenu, has announced their plans to revive a bill that would sentence Palestinian terrorists to death. Knesset member Robert Ilatov claims this legislation would be the best way to deter Palestinians from committing future terror attacks, saying, quote, "The legislation needs to be clear and unequivocal. A terrorist who comes with the goal of murdering innocent civilians, his sentence is death." The Israel Beitenu party has been trying to pass this legislation for many years, and members within the party feel that after yesterday's events, it might have a chance of passing. Israel's Channel 2 News is even reporting that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will support the bill. A recent poll has also shown that over 70% of Jewish citizens of Israel support the death penalty for terrorists. The death penalty has only been implemented once in Israeli civilian courts when Israel tried and convicted Nazi leader Adolf Eichmann in 1962. Meanwhile, Housing Minister Yoav Gallant has come up with another way of dealing with Palestinian terrorism. The former commander of the Southern Command of the IDF says that Israel should deport the families of Palestinian terrorists to Syria, saying, quote, "If you want to kill Israeli kids, we will deport you, not to Gaza, but to Syria. You're not allowed to stay here." Well, just when it seemed like relations between Israel and Turkey were finally starting to return to normal, the Turkish President Recep Erdogan is stirring the pot once again. He's now threatening to sever ties with Israel over the Jewish state's decision to support the establishment of an independent Kurdish state. On Tuesday, the Kurdish leader announced a victory in the referendum on independence. Turkish President Erdogan isn't happy, and he also isn't pleased that Israel has continued to openly support the Kurdish people. The Turkish leader is now hinting that if Israel does not review its support of the Kurdish people or withdraw it, Turkey may end up freezing ties with the Jewish state. Israel and Turkey have had a tumultuous relationship since 2010 when Israeli commandos raided the Gaza-bound Mavi Marmara. The ship was breaching Israel's naval blockade on the coastal enclave. 9 Turks were killed in the incident, which Israel is claiming was self-defense. After years of back-and-forth negotiations, Israel and Turkey finally reached a reconciliation agreement in 2016, but Erdogan's latest comments clearly show that things are not back to normal. Here's just a bit of what he said yesterday. Quote, "Israel cannot save the new country of Kurdistan from Turkish military involvement. Who will recognize your independence? Israel? The world is not about Israel. You should know that the waving of Israeli flags there will not save you." So far, officials from the Israeli government have not responded to his comments, but Prime Minister hopeful and Knesset member Yair Lapid has had no problem slamming the Turkish leader. He took to Twitter to say, quote, "Erdogan's threat to freeze ties if Israel continues to support Kurdish independence is empty. The relations are in any case hollow, and we don't take orders from them." Well, despite what many people think, Jewish fertility in Israel is on the rise, while Arab fertility is on the decline. Here to join us to help break everything down is Dr. Mike Weiss, a doctor of physics and a high-tech investor. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
So, to understand correctly, fertility among the Jewish people is increasing, right? Because this is not something we're necessarily hearing about in the media.
Correct. There's been concern probably since the founding of the State of Israel that Jewish fertility would not keep up with the fertility of the neighbors, and eventually the state would be overwhelmed by Arab, non-Jewish population.
So is this, I mean, is this a state of concerns right now, or are statistics showing otherwise?
Well, what has happened remarkably, just in the last couple of weeks, the National Economic Council, affiliated with the Prime Minister's office, came forth and said Israel does face a demographic problem, which could be catastrophic. Too many Jews, okay, which is a shock.
Yes, that is a shock that we would hear the government saying that, right? So what is, I mean, is this within the Orthodox Jewish community? What does this mean in terms of demographics for Israel? Is rising fertility a result of the Orthodox community, or is this just overall?
The general statement is, and fertility is measured by answering the question, how many children will the average woman have during the course of her lifetime? That's called the total fertility rate.
Right, of course.
2.1 is break even. In other words, if the average woman has 2.1 children, the growth of the population will be 0. Okay, as we know, most of the so-called Western world, 1.5, 1.6, 1.3,
right.
It's catastrophic in many countries, from Japan to Russia to Germany. Therefore, they want to bring in immigrants to provide a workforce. Italy. Around the world, there's a global collapse in fertility. Okay, probably the only, in fact, I'll say definitely the only Western country where the fertility rate exceeds 2.1 is Israel.
Interesting.
Okay.
What is the fertility rate?
The fertility rate in Israel now, the Jewish fertility rate is 3.2 children per woman. The Arab fertility rate in Israel is now declining to 3 and dropping rather rapidly, which was a shock to everybody.
So, why are Israelis deciding to have more children?
In Israel, the population seems to be very optimistic about their future. And it's not only the so-called Haredi, or ultra-religious people, that are having many children. The so-called secular Jews are now giving up that second dog, and they're having a third child instead.
Well, here's my question for you. I mean, you said that Arab fertility rates are beginning to decline. Why is that the case?
Well, it's not only a local phenomenon. As I mentioned before, global fertility has been collapsing. Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, all have declining fertility. And 2 Muslim countries, which are nearby countries, have total collapse in fertility. Iran and Turkey, their fertility rates are now below 1.8, below 1.7, and dropping. It's a remarkable phenomenon.
Well, it really is. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Mike Weiss. And for those who are interested in learning more about this is your man.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, Mexico is still in the midst of massive search and rescue efforts following a wave of devastating earthquakes across the country. Israel has been there on the ground since the get-go to help, but now an Israeli company is taking center stage with a technology that is helping rescue workers find trapped victims. The Israeli firm Camerotech has developed a radio wave technology that can actually see through solid walls and identify people who are buried in the rubble from the earthquakes. The sense-through-the-wall imaging technology actually uses radio waves to map the layout of areas that are blocked by bricks and other material. The waves then penetrate the rubble and get signals back from within. Those signals are able to detect in real time if there is any movement or breathing underneath the destruction. Several reports in Mexico have revealed that the technology has already been used to save a number of people. A tragic 326 people have been killed from the latest round of quakes in Mexico, and the efforts to locate victims who are still trapped under the debris could last for at least 2 more weeks. Last Thursday, a 71-member delegation from the Israeli Army's Home Front Command arrived in the Latin American country to help out, along with 2 Israeli aid organizations. No writer wants their work to be shunned, but the award-winning Israeli author Dorit Rabinyan had to face this very issue. Just 2 years ago, when her critically acclaimed novel All of the Rivers was banned from Israeli schools. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So first of all, tell us a little bit about this book and why it made such big headlines throughout this country.
Well, this is a novel that depicts a relationship between an Israeli woman and a Palestinian man meeting overseas in New York and going through the harsh winter of exile in America. They come to explore one another's identity, and as seemed to be a danger to the Jewish identity, according to the Ministry of Education, they come to realize how many similarities there are between those 2 nations living in neighbor one to another and sharing the same.
So this is interesting because this book was supposed to be in schools here for high schoolers?
Very much like my 2 previous novels, yeah.
Right, and for whatever reason, it caught the eye of the education minister, and he said
for its literary qualities.
For its literary qualities. Now, I mean, how did you react to that? What was the feeling, and why do you think that this story more specifically was targeted?
Of course, I was overwhelmed. I'm still overwhelmed by the fact that I live in a democracy, and I was educated with very liberal values of universal towards this literature. I mean, it's a work of art. It had become now a symbol to the threat over the freedom of speech in Israel because so many changes that our country and our democracy is going through. I think, to be honest, the argument stated in the report by the Ministry of Education found this book to be, and I'm quoting, a danger to the Jewish identity because it might encourage the young readers to be assimilated, apropos what we were hearing about demography. That those couples, this couple, the relationship between the Israeli and the Palestinian in New York in my novel might encourage them to get involved romantically with Palestinians.
It's very interesting that this happened, and it's funny because there was almost an opposite reaction. The second your book was banned, it became even more of a hit in the country because all of a sudden everybody wanted to pick it up and understand what was happening here. Why is this not appropriate for our children to be reading? Now, what has been, I think I just want to understand kind of what that means to you. What do you make of the cultural institutions right now that exist in Israel and kind of how they're treating literature? And what do you plan for your future books? Would you change anything?
No, I don't give them the pleasure, the indulgence of interfere with my artistic ambitions. No, that has nothing to do with the government. The government has nothing to do with our spiritual essence, beings, worlds. It's literature and politics, they don't even brush. It's just that when politics finds literature, the magic of identification as it's being suggested in my work of art, to be a danger to their ambitions, to their brainwashing the community, the population, that there is no other, there is no neighbor, there is no other entity that we're living among.
Well, here's my question for you. Now, your story was really more about a love story between a Palestinian and
two individuals,
an Israeli Jew, two individuals, right? So it wasn't political per se, right?
It's all to do with identities, and identities is a political issue.
So the question is, you know, how should the Israeli government be treating books that necessarily don't, or that don't necessarily show Israel?
It's none of the Ministry of Education's business. I mean, there's a saying by Federico Fellini that every censorship is an ad campaign. It's an ad campaign sponsored by the government, and really, I was privileged enough to enjoy this bad reputation given to me by the Ministry of Education and had gained many, many copies sold. Yet, I would trade those copies sold and this best-selling record being broken any day for living in a stable democracy, that my values and my ground, that the world we're living is much more accurate to the way we feel towards it, and or expect it to be, or know it to be. Israel is being changing so harshly and so rapidly that as artists...
Well, I mean, I still think we have a democracy here. It's not fair to say that there's no democracy here, but obviously...
Yet those steps taken by the current government are threatening this freedom of speech and so many other liberties that we enjoy, or we consider ourselves to be reflecting in our daily life, that I should be. I think it's the threat makes us more responsible to keep it safe.
Well, here's my question for you. For those of our readers who do, in fact, want to read your book, where can they find it?
Oh, it's all over this. It was just released in the U.S. By Random House. It's all over the bookshops and on Amazon or anything.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Dorit, and we'll be looking out for your next book.
Thank you.
All right. There's nothing like some good music to bring a crowd together, and that's the exact premise behind a unique social experiment being carried out in Jerusalem. The Israeli startup Cadenza Piano is placing pianos across the Israeli capital to see the effect the musical instrument has in public spaces. Well, I guess that's what happens when you leave a piano in the middle of Jerusalem's Jaffa Road. People from all backgrounds end up coming together to perform. Cadenza Piano is a company created by two Israeli entrepreneurs. They've distributed pianos across Jerusalem, which are free to be played by anybody between 10 in the morning to 11 o'clock at night. The instruments are concrete encased so that nobody can move them, and the startup hopes to sell them to municipalities and institutions around the world. For now, though, this first Cadenza Piano project is a trial run that will last until the end of November. It's already a hit, though. Cadenza co-founder Evelyn Rubin says she's already seen incredible things, from two Palestinians playing the Israeli national anthem to a former pianist for John Lennon taking a seat in central Jerusalem to churn out a song. The pianos offer the country a unique opportunity to join together in the name of music.
Enroll in eTeacher's online Hebrew courses and quickly discover that it creates the deepest connection to Israel that you could ever imagine.
Where words fail, I believe music speaks. So today's word is psanter, which means piano in Hebrew. They say love is like playing the psanter. First, you must learn to play by the rules, and then you have to forget the rules and just play from your heart. It is true, though, that practice is key, but with a psanter, you don't want to practice until you get it right. You want to practice until you can't get it wrong. But remember, music is supposed to be happiness, so when you're practicing the psanter, make sure to focus on passion and not perfection. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight will be partly cloudy with a low of 71 or 22 degrees Celsius. Tomorrow you can expect little to no change in temperatures with a high of 83 or 28 degrees Celsius. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.54 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for watching.